The goal of this video is to address the worries some people still have about the C.A.T protocol. It is meant to be complementary to the webinar I did in January 2020 about using the C.A.T protocol with fearful cats, the link to which will be available in the description of this video. Often when I get into conversations about C.A.T, people have a very definite negative opinion of it. And I think that's sad because it hints that they don't necessarily understand what it's really about. They might have seen clips of animals taken at baseline and taken that for what the protocol is. They might have only seen one trial where the animal is over threshold or very high on the stress scale, either because the space available doesn't allow for more distance or because the individual does not have a distance where they don't react to their trigger, and then taken that to mean that that's what C.A.T is. And it's not what it has to look like. And so their opinion is very negative. And so I'll try answering some of the common statements or questions people have in this video. I have listed them in the description of the video with the times at which I address them, so if you want to jump to a particular statement, you can. I think the main reason some people still seem to be uncomfortable with C.A.T is because it is a negative reinforcement-based process. And we often have been taught about the concept of negative reinforcement by examples that involve aversives of high magnitude and pain, such as choke collars, metal bits in horses' mouths, pinch collars, shock floors and rats, etc. And so we maintain this very narrow view of what negative reinforcement is. But negative reinforcement is a lot more than that. It's everywhere around us, and it is important for our mental equilibrium. Don't throw me tomatoes yet, keep listening and you might be surprised. So let's look at some examples of negative reinforcement in daily life. The child that is screaming at the supermarket is negatively reinforcing their parents' behavior of buying them a candy bar by stopping the yelling once they do. Your behavior of blowing on your coffee is reinforced by you avoiding getting your lips burned. Your behavior of hitting the snooze button is negatively reinforced by the consequence of making the aversive beep sound stop. You are likely to use that behavior again in similar circumstances because it works. If hitting the snooze button didn't make the beep sound stop, the behavior would go into extinction because it is not reinforced. You would then try other things to get relief from the sound you would rather avoid, such as pulling the electrical cord from the outlet or taking the batteries out. And that would be successful. Negative reinforcement would encourage that behavior in the future instead of the behavior of hitting the snooze button. If you have an annoying coworker at work that gives you stomach upset at lunchtime, you can escape him by eating in your cubicle or by going out to lunch. Your behavior has effect. You can avoid an aversive. Negative reinforcement is an effect and allows you to control the aversive. Now, if the boss forced everyone to eat in the cafeteria all the time, you would then not be able to escape the aversive anymore. You might feel powerless in this context, and so decide to change jobs, because that has effect. You can then escape the coworker. This is a pumping station shaft I went down last summer, in the course of my job. Halfway down, I found myself looking for a reason to get back up. I did. When I went back down 10 seconds later, I was so calm. From the outside, the 2 times I went down looked exactly the same. But because my behavior of escape had been successful, from the inside of my body, the situation was drastically different. I just needed to test it. I needed to know that my escape behavior would be negatively reinforced, that it would be effective. My cat can escape the vacuum cleaner by perching. His behavior has effect. I saw this nice video a while back of a fearful dog that was free to go back to the balcony where he felt safe as they got him used to working in the driveway. And so going to train for treats in the driveway was more fun now because he could retreat to the balcony where he felt safe if he felt the need to. His escape behavior had effect. It's the same thing with an animal that doesn't feel comfortable with you closing the door of their carrier during training. If you confirm to the animal that they will be able to escape should they need to by opening the door when they ask, their sense of control will increase and their internal state change. You negatively reinforce trying to get out by opening the door, confirming to them that their behavior has effect should they need to exhibit it. Trying to escape the carrier works. Start and stop buttons are also something that gives the animal control. When the animal releases from their start position, it's essentially like pushing a stop button. It causes the trainer to stop the procedure. I'm going to negatively reinforce that behavior of pushing the stop button by stopping what I'm doing so you know you have control. Now, if you approach a dog and, unwillingly on your part, he finds you aversive and gives you calming signs, you should actively choose to negatively reinforce those behaviors by moving away. That way, these behaviors continue having effect and will continue to be used. If you don't negatively reinforce them, the dog will escalate and growl because his previous behavior did not have effect. And now for a last one. I had noticed that the topography of the hissing behavior of cats that had been at the shelter for many months tended to change. Initially, they would be at the back of the cage, tense with dilated pupils, and be very convincing. Sheesh! After a few months, they could be sitting in the middle of the cage, pretty relaxed in their body language, and if you approached, they were less convincing. Shish. Well, what happens multiple times a day? Potential adopters or volunteers go towards the cat's cage. The cat hisses. The people stop in their tracks and move away. It works really well. Each person is negatively reinforcing that cat's hissing behavior by going away. The cat learns he has control. He has the power to make people go away. He calms down. And you can also look at it in this way. The natural variability that's going to occur in the hissing behavior makes the cat realize that hissing with a little less intensity works too. And hissing while sitting works too. And hissing with whatever different topography works too. And so by small approximations, the cat gets shaped into the final, more relaxed hissing behavior. Because let's face it, if we can get what we want without putting as much energy into it, why wouldn't we? And with less exuberant behavior comes a more relaxed state. The cat is shaped through negative reinforcement into a more relaxed hissing behavior. And so negative reinforcement is everywhere in our daily lives. I'm not pretending it's fun, but I am acknowledging that it is part of our lives and part of what keeps us in good mental condition. Because in negative reinforcement, you learn how to escape aversives. You need to know you can, you need to know how, you need to know it will work. So both reinforcements, positive and negative, are important to our well-being because aversives will always be present in our lives. And if escape behaviors are not effective when we encounter them, there's a problem. If negative reinforcement is not happening, it means you are not able to control the aversive. We should be mindful of making sure we give the opportunity to our animals to be able to problem solve and affect their outcomes. What I mean is that the aversive that will be present in their lives, whatever we do, should be controllable. If a shelter cat that has lost everything it trusted is afraid of every stranger he meets, we should set up things so that that cat can start to control the strangers and feel better about them. Okay, so let's look at some other common statements people are quick to use when confronted with the fact that cat might not be as evil as they thought. And I get it. It's comforting to be able to throw out something quickly when we feel threatened in our way of thinking. It involves presenting an aversive. While actually any behavior modification training, whose goal is to make an aversive become neutral or repetitive, involves presenting the aversive. That's also the case for counterconditioning with food and for systematic desensitization. Just because we have food in our hands, it does not mean that we are not perceived as an aversive to the animal. Working with an aversive is all a matter of magnitude. If we can make the stimulus low enough in magnitude, the animal is looking relatively calm, but that does not mean the stimulus isn't aversive. We are not inside their body, we do not feel what they are feeling. If you are scared of clowns, you are scared of them at all distances, but the magnitude of your fear is dependent on the proximity of the clown. And so when we say using an aversive, it can have different meanings. If we are working with fearful, aggressive individuals, our training will involve showing or presenting an aversive in order to change the emotional response the animal has to it. In the course of our behavior modification program, we will have to use the aversive by presenting it in order to change the behaviors exhibited in the presence of that aversive. But there is a difference between using an aversive with an animal that's relaxed in our presence by adding it in order to get new behavior. For example, getting your pet dog to sit on command using force or shock. And using our presence as an aversive with an animal that is already scared of us when we show up, with the end goal of it losing its aversiveness. For example, using C.A.T or counterconditioning and systematic desensitization. When the aversive is already occurring in the animal's life, the goal is to present it as low as possible and make it lose its aversiveness as quickly as possible, so that the animal doesn't spend his days dreading the return of the person. When we are working with an individual that is fearful, our end goal should be that the animal is not scared anymore. We want the aversiveness to go away, not to persist. And that's a big difference in how we are using an aversive. You can always choose what you use. Well, no, you can't. We don't get to choose what our learners' appetitives are. We can't make a cat love carrots just because we want to train with carrots. If our learner does not currently have strong appetitives, we can mean to use positive reinforcement and counter-conditioning with food, but it does not mean it will happen. Whether or not positive reinforcement or counter-conditioning happens depends on whether or not behavior increases or emotional response changes or not. Not whether we want it to happen or not. We don't get to choose what our learners' appetitives and aversives are. They tell us. As we saw in the webinar, in order for respondent conditioning to work, there needs to be contiguity between the aversive stimulus and the appetitive stimulus. We also saw that motivating operations can annihilate the value of food. So when we leave the food, it has no value to the cat. Then we pair ourselves with something worthless to the animal. And when he finally eats it at night, 12 hours later, because now it has value to him, because fear doesn't overrun it anymore since no human is around, then it's too late to have contiguity with us. The thing we need to remember, though, is that every time we go to give food, we also leave. Our departure is very much a relief to the animal that's scared of us. And so that pairing with distance from us can be beneficial. But if we don't pay attention to reinforce calmer behaviors, recovery behaviors, then it takes longer. Like that shelter cat whose hissing behavior changes. It takes a very long time. Effectiveness is not enough. Absolutely. We always need to look at the potential side effects of our type of training. Effectiveness is not enough refers to the side effects of using aversives in non-aversive situations. So for example, training that happy dog to sit by adding shock. The side effects are then that the animal gets stressed, you don't put money in your trust account, there's pain involved, etc. The side effects of using C.A.T are that you get a learner that trusts you more, not less. A learner that's more and more relaxed in your presence. You reinforce behavior, and in the process, you become an appetitive instead of an aversive. That's a huge difference. The side effects of C.A.T are good, not bad, and it's effective. The environment is always providing consequences to us, and we are constantly pairing stimulus together. Just because we define a protocol we're using as a respondent, it does not mean operant isn't part of it, and vice versa. The animal will have to eat at some point. That's a very common one, and I'm not always sure what people mean when they say that, and I'm not always sure I would want to. I see two ways this could go. It could mean the cat will eat at midnight, 10 hours after I've left my treats, but she will still pair the food with me. As we saw, we can always tell ourselves that, but without contiguity of stimulus and strong appetitive, it's not happening, or it's happening really slowly. The other thing that the animal will have to eat at some point could mean is that the only time the animal will have access to food is when a human is around. I understand sometimes people say things just to make themselves feel better when they are challenged in their view of thinking. But saying this, forcing an animal to eat only in the presence of an aversive, just because we want to use food, that's not force-free. Eating is essential to survival. It is not something I want to be forcing an animal to do in the presence of a strong aversive. Lindsay Wood-Brown has a good presentation at Clicker Expo about choice and control in a shelter setting for dogs. And one thing I loved hearing her say was that if a dog stops eating while they are there, they go away. They don't become stubborn and try to pair themselves with the food. Pairing themselves with distance is a lot more polite and respectful to the animal. Then they are truly pairing themselves with controlled and build trust. We also need to look at what really happens if a dog starts to eat in your presence after not being able to for 2 days. Is that going to be positive reinforcement? Is food really going to be an appetitive? If the animal hasn't eaten for 2 days because you are depriving him of food when you are not present, the moment he starts finally eating, it will be out of negative reinforcement. Because what you start with is a very aversive state of hunger, which the behavior of eating makes go away. Eating will not be appetitive. Think about it. It would just be a relief. Oh, when the person shows up, I get finally the chance to get relief from this terrible state of deprivation. That's not what you meant to do, but it's what happens when we think of a concept such as negative reinforcement as having a very narrow definition. We don't always see it when it's there or when we are the one causing it. I would like us to lose this idea that the world is black and white. I could teach my cat to touch a running chainsaw by using systematic desensitization, counterconditioning with food, and positive reinforcement. It would not be humane or justified, but the quadrant would still be positive reinforcement. I could be trying to help someone with a problem where their cat is peeing outside the litter box, and my intervention would be to clicker train the cat to enter the box and reinforce it with food for staying in there. I would be using positive reinforcement, but I would not have addressed all the things I should have: possible illness, inappropriate litter box setup, lack of litter box cleanliness, intact status of the cat, presence of roaming cats outside, etc. I would have created a reinforcement history for entering the box, but I would not have addressed any of the reasons why the cat is not peeing in it. And that cat would continue to suffer and be stressed, and his humans might then just decide to get rid of him. Positive reinforcement is not the appropriate solution to every problem. The idea that positive reinforcement will also always involve positive emotions is a bit shaky. Alexandra Curlin at Clicker Expo said, just because you're using positive reinforcement doesn't mean your learner is having a positive learning experience. When the animal tries something but doesn't get reinforced for it, Some frustration and unsatisfaction can show up in them. We don't completely forego negative emotions when we use positive reinforcement. We try to and hope to, going for errorless learning, but we don't always succeed at it. Similarly, although the C.A.T protocol is defined as a negative reinforcement process, the emotional state of the animal gets better and better, and not worse, like we tend to think it would using this concept. Life is not black and white. Positive reinforcement is not fail-safe, and negative reinforcement is not evil. Life is shades of gray. Just because food is involved does not mean it's godlike and we shouldn't be asking questions. And just because negative reinforcement is involved does not mean it is pure evil. I'll repeat the quote I gave in the webinar from Ken Ramirez at Clicker Expo last year. Where I think deprivation gets us in trouble is the same place aversive tools get us in trouble. It's not that the tool itself is bad, it's just that as humans, when we use a tool, we tend to take it to extremes. And in the same presentation, he later said, maybe you ought to see what their use of that tool is. Maybe you'll find that their version of the tool is very different than your understanding, or maybe their application is one that's done in a very unique way. I think sometimes in our community, we are so quick to say, never do that, never do this, and we don't really look at what the person is doing. Ken Ramirez is Executive Vice President and Chief Training Officer of Karen Pryor Clicker Training. Dr. Jesus Rosales Ruiz is the professor behind the C.A.T protocol, and he has been a presenter at Clicker Expo since the very first time it was held. If those facts don't get you to start reevaluating your view of concepts like negative reinforcement and wanting to understand these concepts better, I don't know what will. Recognizing that distance from an aversive will generate relief in our learner makes us a lot more humane towards our animals because we see the aversives better. Using distance from an aversive won't make you an evil trainer. Why do I keep wanting to use the C.A.T protocol? Well, as much as I'm negatively reinforcing these cats' behaviors, they are also negatively reinforcing mine. Using this protocol makes the scared cat go away. I don't like seeing an animal being afraid of me. That's an aversive to me. I would much rather avoid it. And this protocol allows me to escape that aversive as the animal starts to trust me. We need to think and ask the person in front of us to describe what they are doing before we judge. I feel much more comfortable and humane starting by showing up 20 feet away and giving the cat the power to make me leave quickly, than going all the way to the cage to leave food the cat will not care for. I'm keeping my learner lower on the stress scale by staying afar, and I'm being a lot more polite. The quadrants and all the other concepts of the science of behavior happen every day in our lives. Recognizing when they do helps us understand them better and use them more wisely and humanely. If you're still feeling unsure about this protocol, I invite you to let your brain process all of this for a day or two. And after that, if you have any questions or concerns, I'm always interested in discussing this subject by email.